These taxes don't target wealth, they target confusion. Not income brackets, not luxury assets, but moments when people don't stop to ask why they're being charged at all. Because somewhere between buying a basic necessity and following a local rule you didn't know existed, money quietly changes hands, legally, automatically, and without much resistance. Have you ever paid a fee that felt too small to argue with? Have you ever assumed a charge must be normal because it was printed on a receipt? Have you ever learned about a tax only after discovering you'd already been paying it for years? That's not an accident. Some of the strangest taxes still in effect today sound like jokes when you hear them out loud. Taxes on food that's prepared one way but not another. Fees tied to how long you stand somewhere. Fines triggered by behaviors so ordinary that avoiding them would require reorganizing your life. And yet, they're enforced, collected, defended. Not because they're fair, but because they're quiet. The logic behind them is rarely about punishment. It's about efficiency. If a behavior is common enough, predictable enough, and mildly inconvenient to change, it becomes a reliable revenue stream. And the people who feel it most aren't the ones with accountants. They're the ones without time, the ones who can't afford to study fine print, the ones who assume the rules make sense because questioning them feels exhausting. Today, we're opening the file on the strangest and most absurd experiments humanity has ever attempted. Not experiments in taxation, but experiments in compliance. Because when a system charges you for confusion, fairness stops being the goal. What matters is how many people don't notice, don't complain, and don't realize the charge was optional in the first place. Fasten your seatbelts. Logic is about to die a spectacular death. Fact 1. When a bag fee became a poverty tax. Plastic bag taxes were introduced to reduce waste. The logic was clean. Charge a small fee, change behavior. But the people who felt it most weren't shoppers buying in bulk with reusable bags. It was people making small, frequent purchases, often on foot, often after work, often without planning. The fee was tiny. The repetition wasn't. For lawmakers, the tax was a nudge. For low-income shoppers, it became a daily toll for forgetting to prepare. The tax didn't punish waste. It punished spontaneity. Fact 2. When food was taxed based on how ready it looked. In some places, a cold sandwich is taxed differently than a hot one. A whole pizza is taxed differently than a sliced one. The logic? Prepared food is a luxury. Groceries are not. The reality? People buying single meals after long shifts pay more than people buying in bulk to cook at home. The tax didn't measure income. It measured circumstance. Fact 3. When parking fines targeted time, not wealth. Parking fines are flat. They don't scale with income. They scale with how long you're gone. For someone with flexibility, that's manageable. For someone juggling multiple jobs, it's a trap. The fine doesn't hurt because it's large. It hurts because it's unavoidable. The system doesn't ask why you were late. It charges you for being late. Fact 4. When local fees existed because you couldn't move. Some towns impose special local taxes tied to residency, trash, water access, even maintenance fees. Moving would avoid them. But moving isn't free. These taxes survive because they're geographically sticky. They attach to people who can't easily leave. The logic isn't fairness, it's stability of revenue. Fact 5. When small fines replaced enforcement. Some fines exist not to stop behavior, but to monetize it. Jaywalking tickets, minor code violations, paperwork penalties. The amounts are small, the enforcement is selective. The goal isn't deterrence, it's predictable income from predictable mistakes. The system doesn't need everyone to break the rule. It only needs enough people to not notice it. Fact 6. When using cash cost more. In some cities, paying in cash comes with extra fees or fewer discounts. The system rewards digital payments and quietly penalizes those who don't use them. The logic is efficiency. Digital is faster, easier to track. But the people affected most are those without stable access to banking, the unbanked, the elderly, the recently arrived. The tax doesn't punish cash, it punishes exclusion. Fact 7. When paying late, cost more than the service. Late fees often exceed the original charge. A missed deadline triggers penalties that multiply quickly. The rule isn't about discipline, it's about certainty. The system assumes time is evenly distributed, that everyone can stop, remember, and comply on schedule. The fee doesn't measure irresponsibility, it measures how tight your margin for error is. Fact 8. When smoking taxes targeted addiction, not choice. Sin taxes are justified as deterrence. Raise the price, reduce the behavior. But addiction doesn't respond to pricing like preference does. Those who quit avoid the tax. Those who can't pay it, repeatedly. The tax doesn't discourage the habit, it monetizes the inability to stop. Fact 9. When public transport fines hit the rushed. Fare evasion penalties are flat. Missing a tap or a swipe during rush hour costs the same as intentional skipping. The rule doesn't ask why, it asks whether the system registered payment. For people running late, juggling kids, or switching lines fast, the fine becomes a tax on being rushed. The system charges speed, not intent. Fact 10. When convenience fees became inescapable. Convenience fees appear when alternatives disappear. Pay online, pay extra. Pay in person, take time off work. The fee isn't for convenience, it's for access. Those with time avoid it. Those without, pay it. The tax doesn't reward ease, it charges urgency. Fact 11. When water came with a surcharge. Some cities add separate fees to water bills for infrastructure recovery. The water itself isn't taxed differently. Access to it is. The logic is maintenance. Pipes cost money. But the fee doesn't scale with usage. It scales with residents. The tax doesn't charge consumption. It charges existence. Fact 12. When clothing became a luxury by definition. In certain jurisdictions, basic clothing is taxed once it crosses an arbitrary price line. The logic is simple. Above that number, it's no longer a necessity. The reality is colder. Winter coats don't get cheaper because income is lower. The tax doesn't measure luxury, it measures retail price. Fact 13. When food was taxed based on temperature. Hot food is taxed. Cold food often isn't. The justification is convenience versus groceries. But for people without kitchens, storage, or time, hot food isn't convenience, it's survival. The tax doesn't punish indulgence, it punishes lack of options. Fact 14. When phone bills doubled from fees alone. Telecommunications bills often include layers of taxes and surcharges unrelated to usage. Emergency fees, access fees, regulatory fees. Most customers can't opt out. They can only read the breakdown after paying. The tax doesn't reflect choice, it reflects dependency. Fact 15. When energy taxes hit before paychecks do. Utility taxes are flat additions to bills that arrive regardless of income timing. Renters pay them monthly. Owners spread them annually. The cost is the same. The pressure isn't. The tax doesn't care when you're paid. It cares when the bill is due. Fact 16. When a stormwater fee taxed your roof. Some cities charge a stormwater fee based on how much rain your property sheds into the sewer system. The calculation isn't about income or usage, it's about square footage, roof size, driveway length. The logic is engineering. More runoff, more strain on infrastructure. The impact is human. Renters and small homeowners pay a flat fee they can't change without changing where they live. Planting trees doesn't remove it. Conserving water doesn't reduce it. The bill arrives regardless. The tax survives because it feels technical. Few people argue hydrology. Fewer still know how to appeal it. It doesn't punish waste. It monetizes geography. Fact 17. when trash fees existed, even if you made no trash. In some municipalities, residents pay mandatory trash or sanitation fees whether they use the service or not. The bill is tied to the address, not the bin. The legislative logic is reliability. Waste removal must be funded consistently. The lived reality is simpler. Minimal consumption doesn't lower the cost. Recycling more doesn't remove the charge. The fee treats every household as identical. Those who can move avoid it. Those who can't absorb it monthly. The tax doesn't reward residency, it charges residency. Fact 18. When local maintenance fees replaced tax increases. Instead of raising taxes, some towns add line item maintenance fees for roads, lighting, or community services. They're framed as temporary. They rarely are. The logic is political. Fees are easier to pass than taxes. The effect is cumulative. Residents pay multiple small charges that feel separate, even though they function like a tax increase. People don't vote on fees the same way they vote on taxes. That's why fees multiply. The system doesn't seek fairness, it seeks approval through fragmentation. Fact 19. When tourist taxes became resident taxes. Hotel and occupancy taxes were designed to charge visitors. Over time, similar fees spread to short-term rentals and extended stays used by locals. The justification stayed the same. The target shifted. Residents paying to live near work or family began subsidizing tourism infrastructure they rarely used. Avoiding the tax meant commuting farther or relocating entirely. The fee didn't follow intent. It followed availability. Fact 20. When local registration never expired. Some local governments require annual registrations for pets, vehicles, or even rental units, with recurring fees that never sunset. The logic is oversight. Records must stay current. The result is permanence. Miss a year and penalties stack. Compliance becomes a recurring cost of staying put. The tax doesn't measure use, it measures continuity. Fact 21. When a small daily fee outran a weekly wage. Some commuter-related fees are measured in single dollars per day. Tolls, access charges, zone fees. Individually harmless, collectively relentless. For a worker earning a median hourly wage, those dollars compound into a meaningful percentage of weekly income. The fee doesn't adjust for frequency, it assumes occasional use. But commuting isn't occasional. The logic treats movement as optional. The math treats it as daily. Over a month, the cost rivals a utility bill. Over a year, it rivals a pay raise that never arrives. The tax isn't large, it's persistent. Fact 22. When a flat fine meant a full day's pay. Flat fines look fair on paper because they're equal. Everyone pays the same number. In practice, that number represents different realities. For someone on a median income, a modest fine can equal a full day's wages after taxes. The system counts equality. It doesn't count time. Paying the fine may require skipping work, compounding the loss. The penalty isn't just the amount, it's the interruption. The fine doesn't scale with means, it scales with vulnerability. Fact 23. When optional fees consumed a monthly budget. Optional fees exist where alternatives exist, technically. Pay online for speed or in person for free. For workers with inflexible schedules, the free option costs hours. The paid option costs money. Against a median income, convenience fees quietly consume budget lines meant for essentials. The system frames the choice as preference. The budget experiences it as necessity. The fee doesn't buy convenience, it buys compliance with limited time. Fact 24. When regressive taxes hid in percentages. Sales taxes apply uniformly. A percentage sounds neutral, but for households near the median, consumption takes up a larger share of income. Essentials are taxed the same as non-essentials in many cases. The math is invisible. The impact isn't. A few percentage points mean little to savings. They mean everything to cash flow. The tax doesn't see income, it sees transactions. Fact 25. When penalties arrived before paychecks. Some fines and fees trigger immediately, while wages arrive bi-weekly or monthly. The mismatch matters. Paying early requires credit. Credit adds cost. Cost adds pressure. Against a median income, timing becomes a penalty multiplier. The system doesn't wait for liquidity, it enforces deadlines. The fee isn't about amount, it's about when you're allowed to have money. Fact 26. When paying the right way costs extra. In many systems, the compliant option is the expensive one. Paper billing is free only if you wait weeks. Instant payment carries a processing fee. The logic is efficiency. Faster systems cost more to operate. The reality is asymmetry. People with time wait. People without time pay. Against a median income, those fees don't buy convenience. They buy survival in a schedule that doesn't bend. The tax doesn't reward compliance. It monetizes urgency. Fact 27. When healthy choices were taxed by design. Sugary drinks are taxed to discourage consumption. That's the stated goal. But healthier alternatives often cost more upfront and aren't available everywhere. In low-access areas, the taxed option remains the cheapest. The logic targets behavior. The environment limits choice. The tax doesn't change habits evenly. It charges the lack of options. Fact 28. When paperwork became a revenue stream. Permits, renewals, and filings often carry fees that recur regardless of change. Miss a form, pay more. File late, pay again. The logic is administration. Records must be kept current. The outcome is predictability. People forget, systems charge. Revenue flows without enforcement. The tax doesn't measure harm, it measures forgetfulness. Fact 29. When safety fees didn't reduce risk. Some fees are justified as safety measures, inspection stickers, certifications, compliance tags. The charge is fixed, the benefit varies. Those who can afford upgrades pass inspections easily. Those who can't pay the fee repeatedly. The tax doesn't improve safety, it prices entry into compliance. Fact 30. When choice existed only on paper. Many taxes hinge on a choice that technically exists, but practically doesn't. Use another route, pick another provider, shop elsewhere. The alternatives require time, transport, or information most people don't have. The logic preserves fairness. The reality removes it. The tax doesn't eliminate choice. It prices it out of reach. Fact 31. When small late fees were designed to be ignored. Late fees are often framed as reminders, not punishments. A few dollars here, a few more there. Small enough to avoid arguments, consistent enough to add up. The legislative logic is behavioral correction. Miss a date, feel a sting. But the system relies on something else, forgetfulness at scale. Enough people miss deadlines to turn reminders into steady revenue. For households near the median income, the fee doesn't hurt because it's large. It hurts because it repeats, often faster than budgets can adjust. The penalty doesn't teach punctuality. It monetizes human error. Fact 32. When administrative fines replaced enforcement. Some rules are enforced not by prevention, but by paperwork. File incorrectly, pay a fine. Miss a detail, pay again. The logic is efficiency. Enforcement costs money. Forms don't. The system doesn't need to catch violations in the moment. It only needs to review records later. For people without legal help or time, compliance becomes probabilistic. Eventually, a fee arrives. The fine doesn't correct behavior, it corrects balance sheets. Fact 33. When penalties existed because they're boring. The most durable fines aren't controversial. They're dull. Too technical to protest, too minor to mobilize against. They hide in notices few people read and invoices few people question. The logic is stability. Outrage fluctuates. Boredom persists. The fee doesn't survive scrutiny. It survives apathy. Fact 34. When disputing cost more than paying. Many small fines can be challenged. In theory, In practice, disputing requires time off work, paperwork, and waiting. Paying is faster. Against a median income, time is more expensive than the fine. The system doesn't block appeals, it prices them out. The penalty doesn't demand agreement, it demands efficiency. Fact 35. When the cost of compliance exhausted the violation. Some regulations require compliance steps that cost more than the fine itself. Permits, inspections, or corrections. People choose the fine because it's cheaper. The logic treats fines as deterrents. The math turns them into fees. The system doesn't eliminate the behavior, it normalizes payment. Fact 36. When small fees outlived big reforms. Large taxes attract attention. They get debated, amended, repealed. Small fees don't. They persist through reforms untouched. The logic is procedural. Legislators focus on headline numbers. Line items survive because they don't move polls. Over time, these fees become institutional furniture. Removing them feels riskier than keeping them, even when their original purpose has expired. The system doesn't defend them publicly. It forgets to revisit them privately. Longevity here isn't proof of fairness. It's proof of invisibility. Fact 37. When temporary charges never left. Many fees are introduced as temporary solutions: emergency funding, pilot programs, transitional measures. Once collected, they develop beneficiaries. Budgets adapt. Removing them creates gaps no one wants to explain. The temporary label expires. The charge doesn't. The system doesn't lie. It just stops checking whether the reason still exists. What began as a bridge becomes a toll road. Fact 38. When fragmentation protected revenue. A single large tax is obvious. Dozens of small ones are not. Fragmentation spreads attention thin. Each charge feels manageable. Together, they rival major taxes without triggering resistance. The logic is accounting. The effect is psychological. People don't revolt against totals they never see. The system doesn't hide the cost. It distributes it until no one tracks it. Fact 39. When complexity became a shield. Complex fees discourage scrutiny. The more technical the explanation, the fewer questions follow. Appeals require expertise. Understanding requires time. Both are scarce. The charge survives not because it's justified, but because understanding it feels like work. The system doesn't block transparency, it overwhelms it. Fact 40. When opting out required a different life. Many small taxes can be avoided, technically, by changing routines, locations, providers, or schedules. Avoidance requires flexibility. Flexibility correlates with income. Those who can't change, pay. Those who can, don't notice. The tax doesn't target poverty, it targets immobility. Fact 41. When fairness was defined by simplicity. Many of these taxes survive because they are simple to apply. Flat amounts, clear triggers, easy enforcement. Simplicity looks fair on paper. Everyone pays the same, everyone follows the same rule. But simplicity ignores context. It ignores income volatility. It ignores time scarcity. It ignores how unevenly avoidable behaviors are distributed. The system values rules that are easy to administer more than outcomes that are hard to measure. The tax doesn't ask who struggles. It asks who complies. Fact 42. When law assumed time was free. Most weird taxes quietly assume people have time. Time to read notices, time to compare options, time to appeal. For those with flexible schedules, that assumption holds. For everyone else, time costs money. The law doesn't charge for time directly. It charges people who don't have it. What looks like neutral design becomes selective pressure. The tax isn't about revenue alone. It's about whose time counts. Fact 43. When choice existed only for some. Legally, many of these charges are avoidable. Practically, they aren't. Choice requires alternatives. Alternatives require resources. People with cars avoid transit fines. People with savings avoid late fees. People with lawyers avoid penalties entirely. The law records equal opportunity. Life delivers unequal access. The tax doesn't discriminate by name, it discriminates by capacity. Fact 44. When compliance replaced consent. Over time, paying these fees becomes routine. People stop asking why. They budget for them. Compliance replaces agreement. Normalization replaces fairness. The system doesn't need approval, it needs predictability. Once a fee is expected, it's no longer questioned. The tax doesn't justify itself. It waits until no one remembers to ask. Fact 45. When the gap between law and life became normal. These taxes aren't shocking because they're large. They're unsettling because they're familiar. They exist in the gap between how laws are written and how life is actually lived. That gap isn't an error. It's where revenue becomes reliable. The system doesn't target wealth. It targets the space where understanding ends and routine begins. And that's why these taxes last. Not because they're fair, but because they're quiet enough to survive. So far, none of these taxes required conspiracy, cruelty, or bad intentions to exist. They didn't survive because lawmakers were laughing at people. They survived because they worked quietly, worked predictably, worked without needing anyone's attention. What we've seen isn't a collection of weird rules. It's a pattern. Small charges attached to ordinary behavior. Fees that feel too minor to question. Fines that arrive not because someone did something extreme, but because life happened slightly out of sync with a schedule written on paper. Each one, on its own, looks reasonable, even defensible. But together they reveal something uncomfortable. These systems don't ask who can afford the cost. They ask who can afford the time to avoid it. Time to read the notice. Time to appeal the fine. Time to change routines, providers, routes, or habits. And time is not evenly distributed. What makes these taxes durable isn't fairness, it's friction. They live in the space where questioning feels more expensive than paying, where understanding the rule takes more effort than accepting the charge. That's why they're rarely protested, not because people agree with them, but because each one feels like it's not worth the fight. Over time, payment becomes routine. Fees turn into background noise. And what started as a line item quietly becomes a permanent part of living in the system. The most effective taxes don't announce themselves. They blend in. And once they do, the question stops being, is this fair? It becomes, is this normal? That's the moment when the gap between law and daily life stops feeling like a problem and starts feeling like reality. Maybe the most revealing thing about these taxes isn't how strange they sound. It's how normal they've become. None of them collapse a life overnight. None of them trigger outrage on their own. They're too small for headlines, too technical for dinner conversations, too routine to feel worth questioning. And that's exactly why they work. Because systems don't need people to agree with them. They only need people to adapt, to budget around them, to sigh, pay, and move on. Over time, these charges stop feeling like policies and start feeling like weather, something you plan for but never expect to change. What these taxes expose isn't greed or incompetence. It's design. Design that values predictability over fairness. Design that assumes time is free, attention is unlimited, and choice exists equally for everyone. On paper, the law treats everyone the same. In practice, it treats flexibility as currency. Those who have time avoid fees. Those who have money outsource them. Everyone else pays. And not because they're irresponsible, but because they're busy living inside the margins the law doesn't see. We always reach for the impossible, but sometimes it's because no one stopped to ask if we should. No one stopped to ask whether a rule written for efficiency still makes sense in a life built on exhaustion. Whether a fee designed to nudge behavior actually nudges anything or just extracts quietly from the same routines over and over again. The gap between law and life isn't an accident. It's where the system becomes most efficient, where charges don't need to be defended because they no longer feel optional. And once something feels unavoidable, it stops being debated. That's how weird taxes survive. Not by being fair, not by being popular, but by being small enough, quiet enough, and boring enough to fade into the background. This has been The Absurdist Files, where logic takes a vacation and reality writes the jokes. And in this case, the joke isn't that the rules are strange, it's that we've learned to live with them as if they weren't.